In 1628, the Dutch East India Company's ship Batavia set sail from the Netherlands bound for the East Indies, loaded with gold, silver, and precious treasure. The voyage was supposed to be routine, but it turned into one of the bloodiest stories in maritime history, a tale of treachery, murder, and madness in the middle of the Indian Ocean. The ship was commanded by Captain Francisco Pelsaert, who was responsible for the ship's cargo and safety. But the real man who would leave his horrific mark on history was Jeronimus Cornelisz, his second in command, a former pharmacist with dangerous ideas and a penchant for From the beginning of the voyage, Pelsaert and Cornelisz had been at odds, with the latter dreaming of stealing the ship and escaping with the spoils. Cornelisz began to form a secret alliance with a group of mutineers, mostly disgruntled sailors and soldiers greedy for wealth. Cornelisz was a clever and cunning man, sowing doubts among the crew and convincing them that Pelsaert was incompetent and did not care about their interests. He convinced some of the officers that the captain planned to abandon them at the first opportunity, which led to increasing tension. After weeks of sailing, and with tensions rising, Cornelisz decided to act. His plan was to drown the captain and his loyal officers, but he was unable to carry out the plan because the ship ran aground on a coral reef near the Abrolhos Islands off the coast of Australia. This is where the real nightmare began. After the ship sank, about 280 crew and passengers survived and managed to reach a barren island with no water or food. Captain Pelsaert and the officers tried to find help in a small boat, leaving the rest at the mercy of Cornelisz and his followers. With the captain gone, Cornelisz realized that he had a golden opportunity to establish absolute control. He gathered all available weapons and forbade anyone from using them without his permission. He then began eliminating those he considered a threat to his rule, ordering the killing of anyone he suspected of disloyalty. Cornelisz began to impose his authority by force, declaring himself absolute leader, and thus began the bloodbath. The survivors had no choice but to submit or die. Children were forced to watch their families being slaughtered, and women were used as pleasure slaves. Cornelisz took great pains to torturing his victims, tying some to rocks and throwing them into the sea to slowly drown. Even those who submitted to his rule were not safe, as he suspected everyone. Anyone who hesitated to carry out his orders was brutally killed, and terror became the only law on the island. As the days passed, Cornelisz's brutality increased. He began experimenting with more brutal methods of killing, such as starving some to death and forcing others to fight each other for survival. No one was safe from his madness. Even some of his followers whose loyalty he doubted were brutally murdered. Men were forced to face each other in deadly battles, while Cornelisz and his savages watched with laughter. Women did not fare much better, being enslaved and repeatedly raped. Cornelisz sent a small group of survivors to another island under the pretext of searching for resources, but in reality he intended to get rid of them. However, these survivors managed to find primitive weapons and prepared to resist the tyrant's rule. When Captain Pelsaert returned with a rescue ship, he found Cornelisz had established his bloody kingdom, and he realized that eliminating him would not be easy.
By the time Captain Pelsayert arrived on the island, there was no room for negotiation. The island had become a battlefield, with the survivors divided between those who supported Cornelisz and those who decided to fight him. The captain decided to launch an organized attack on the rebels using the weapons he had brought with his troops. A brutal battle broke out on the beaches, with the survivors using rocks and primitive weapons to confront Cornelisz's armed followers. Screams of pain and anger echoed as the sands turned into a pool of blood. The fighting was fierce, but the survivors, who had tasted the horrors of Cornelisz's rule, fought fiercely to avenge their executioner. Cornelisz attempted to escape by sea but was captured after a fierce chase. He was tied up and dragged before Captain Pelsayert, who ordered his immediate execution. But the survivors demanded that he be punished slowly, as he had done to them. His fingers were amputated one by one, then his tongue was cut out so that he could not scream, and finally he was hanged in front of the survivors. The rest of his followers were executed in various ways, some by drowning in the sea while bound, others by stabbing to death. These executions were a bloody revenge for what the survivors had suffered. After the battle, the survivors were evacuated and taken to safety. None of them forgot what had happened on the island of death, and the story of the Batavia Massacre became an eternal warning of the brutality of man when left without law or mercy. The Batavia tragedy remains one of the most brutal stories in maritime history, a testament to the darkness into which human beings can descend when lawlessness prevails and greed takes over. It demonstrated that greed can drive people to atrocities, but it also demonstrated the power of survival and hope in the face of horror. The Batavia tragedy is not just a story of violence and brutality, but a lesson that civilization depends not only on laws, but on the human values that protect societies from descending into chaos. While the ocean may have swallowed the ship, the echoes of these bloody events continue to reverberate through the centuries, etched into history as a warning against greed and tyranny.